Hey folks, I'm Sir Vainglory and welcome to Anatomy of a Battle number 21. This time we have an attack defence scenario, Last Stand on Hill 112, with the 4th Armoured Division attacking and I'm commanding the 3rd Fallschirmjager defending. So the new attack defence scenarios came out last week and I was hyped to try them out. I used to play a turn-based game called Steel Panthers, which was World War II and right up to modern era. And really enjoyed the different types of scenarios you can get in there, like pitched battles and attack defence. So I was keen to try out the Steel Division version of that. So my initial setup, as you'll probably see, I had some Panzerabwehr and Recce troops deployed forward. My anti-tank guns, some mortars were a bit further back, and just behind that we had a couple of Flak 36s and a Flak 41 on the slopes of the hill. And then on either flank we've got a couple of anti-tank guns and a few units at the moment on top of the hill. So the plan was that I would try and deal with the Recce and the light armour that might push forward initially and build up my forces on top of the hill as the phases passed. And as you might notice, the game's running at speed 5. After about 5 or 6 minutes setting up our forces, the game began and nothing happened. I waited patiently for a few minutes, making the odd tweak to my setup, and after a while I began to wonder if my opponent had maybe not understood that he was supposed to be attacking me, and then I began to worry. I'd expected the Americans would start probing in Phase A, then gradually build up to a full attack, so the anti-tank units I'd forward deployed were meant to take out the Recce vehicles and light armour, and then withdraw to screen the anti-tank guns further back. But if the Americans just waited and threw everything forward together in Phase C, those units would simply be overrun. So I decided I had to do something to try to get my opponent reacting to me, rather than leave him to carefully develop his plan. You can see that there have been some movements in the rear area, some armoured units, light armour and some infantry, but nothing of any note and nothing approaching my positions yet. So you can see there's a few more units coming in, some more anti-tank and artillery units and another off-map artillery observer. So having moved into Phase B, I was just trying to bolster my defences that bit more. Also queued up some aircraft. And there's still nothing really from the Americans in terms of advance. So I was really beginning to get a bit nervous about what he was going to hit me with. And after sort of 15 minutes or so of nothing happening, I decided to see if I could strike a blow before the American was ready. With all the Recce troops I had deployed and the Panzerabwehr as well, I thought that it might be possible to get sight of his forces in their assembly area and maybe even hit them with an off-map barrage. So I decided to send my spotter on towards the right side forward and see if he could get into position where he could range the town. So I decided to send him right up to the tree line, just along from or in between the two sort of Recce units. But there continued to be no sign of any American troops. So time passes, and after about 17 minutes of game time, there was finally some movement. A light machine gun rifle squad starts moving forward, and I didn't think for a second that it might just be an isolated squad, and I decided to call in a barrage on its route of march. Over on the left, I'd also called in a barrage on top of some more units I'd seen over there, and we managed to take out a whole engineer leader squad. Over on the right hand side, a 210mm barrage comes in with full fire and fury. But a quick check of the score showed that it didn't destroy any units at all. So I was assuming that there would be something in there, but not. So I pulled the observer back a bit, keep it safe. And I began to see a bit more movement, but still nothing substantial. So you can see by now that there's a few more units visible, Recce units. Anti-tank gun further back, and there's a Hellcat and another Bantam, I think, on the right hand side. And a Bantam appeared up this road and it began firing on my OP observer and was able to take it out, and then it moved into position to scout that area. The recce vehicle on the right had forced my observer there to fall back, and then immediately turned to fire on the Panzerabwehr that I'd thought was still hidden. When I saw it being fired on, I pulled it back into better cover. And then an M8 command car appeared in the tree line, but the second barrage here came in, took out the recce vehicle, which was a Bantam, and almost suppressed the M8. But again, there didn't appear to be any other casualties, so I've used 2 of the 3 off-map barrages there to no real effect. So overall, we're halfway through the battle, just into phase C, and I can hardly see any American units at all, and he's not really made any progress in terms of advancing. So eventually, over on the left-hand side, there were some indications of movement in that flank. An armoured rifle squad seemed to be serving as a lookout, and there was a build-up of tanks and light armour of some description evident in the village beyond those infantry. And there are also signs of a build-up in the centre, with an unidentified tank moving right towards my SPA troop, and infantry appearing in the tree line to the left. And time passed, there continued to be definite signs of an advance beginning there now, but it dips in and out of cover. And in the centre, my SPA troops' luck finally runs out as the tank almost runs over them. They're spotted and fired on by all of the vehicles nearby, and they were quickly forced to surrender. And the infantry to the left, there's an engineer squad and a LMG rifle squad are now pushing further forward with an anti-aircraft half-track following in. So he's definitely beginning to edge forward now. The rifle squad that was keeping watch on the left began pushing forward along the hedgerows towards the next line of trees. The majority of the armour and other vehicles remained hidden though. I decided there's no point making it easy for the Americans and had my GB H40 fire on them, but the shells don't land anywhere near the infantry and they disappear into the tree line unharmed, so all that's happened is that I've revealed the position of my field gun. And similarly, to the left and the centre, I decided to have the GB H40 target advancing engineers and light machine gun rifles. Again, the rounds fall off target and don't achieve anything. So my phase B reinforcements are beginning to come in now. In fact, phase C reinforcements. I have a couple of Stugs up on the hill, and I've sent a Pack 40 further forward to take up position on the ridgeline. On the left, the Americans spotted the first of my Pack 38s and targeted it with ranged fire from a self-propelled artillery piece, probably an M7. And an Opel Blitz with a Pack 40 intended to take position on the right side of the road had just arrived, and there's a risk that it might get caught in artillery fire and suppressed before it's even unloaded. Over on the right, a Hellcat and an M8 command car emerged from cover and moved down the right flank. There's an armoured rifle squad following, and it's an example of the approach the American commander was generally taking as he moved the vehicles to cover of the next tree line and halted them there. Up on the hilltop, I'd repositioned the GB H I'd had firing on the infantry to avoid counter-battery fire. And apart from that, just holding position and watching as the American edged closer. On the left, when the Pack 38 recovered morale, I immediately tried to reposition it, but an engineer squad broke from the trees and pushed towards the gun. My Pack 40 then fired on the engineers as they crossed open ground. But the M7 finished off the Pack 38 anyway. In the centre, it looked like American is beginning to advance in earnest now, with some of the visible light armoured vehicles moving forward and the engineer squad moving out of the trees. My Pack 40 fired on the engineers, giving away its position, and I wished there was a filter that you could set for anti-tank units only to fire on armoured units. So I've decided to call in my HS-129s now that I've got legitimate targets, and I bring them both in, one to target the Hellcat and one to target the M8. So they're able to take out both vehicles. And I'd also brought in both of my 2-star ME-109s to provide cover. The 109s went to engage 3 American fighters, and as they did so they overflew a load of anti-aircraft fire. So they began to fall back, and then the American aircraft overflew my anti-aircraft fire, and with the whole furball ended up with all of the aircraft falling back, apart from one of my Messerschmitts, which was shot down. In the centre we can see that the LMG rifle squad had now pushed forward as the first artillery rounds landed by my Pak-40. The anti-tank gun fired a couple of shots at the infantry before it was pinned down. And that's the same dogfight that was going on earlier. A rifle squad approached along the main road on the left, and it was fired on by an LG-42. And once again, an anti-tank unit revealed its position firing on infantry. In future games, absolutely everything was going to have return fire only and would be manually set to fire when the armour appeared, which would be a micro nightmare, I'm sure. And to add to the fun, the Flak 41 also fired on the rifle squad, and then further back engineers were fired on by an LG-42. On the right, another Hellcat emerged on that flank and took up position with good vision of the area behind the tree line, and a jeep moved beyond the Hellcat to take up position further round the flank. So he's just keeping an eye on the flanks at the moment. He doesn't seem to be actually pushing forward on them. The remainder of the engineer squad over on the left reappeared and pushed towards my Pak-40. And again, anti-tank gun got a shot off on them and pinned them down again. Then it turned to fire on a recce section in the centre. So we've got Pak-40 shooting at various infantry squads. And in the centre, the Pak-40 was eventually taken out by artillery rounds, counter battery fire. And then over on the left, there's a Hellcat rounded the tree line and fired on my Pak-40. Again, the gun managed to get one shot off, but then it was pinned by the Hellcat. And the Pak-40 was eventually under fire from the Hellcat, surviving engineer squad, as well as being shelled by an M7, and it was eventually wiped out. I'd called in another off-map barrage, mostly because I wanted to use it before I lost my spotter, and its target is 3 damaged infantry squads this time. While the barrage fell, the American brought in a B-26B-10 Marauder, came in to attack my Pak-40 that was still under artillery fire. I brought in my 109 and I was able to shoot down the Marauder, but the Pak was eventually destroyed by artillery. An armoured rifle squad in a leader section moved towards the main road and uncovered my Panzerabwehr section. Another M8 command car and his the American's M475 Abrams followed them up again, but they stayed behind the trees. So my advanced units are being whittled away one at a time, with some of my anti-tank units further back being destroyed by artillery, and the American's been very patient in his approach here. The infantry on the right is now pushing towards the tree line on the ridge, and the Hellcat that's out wide also pushed forward, but the rest of the units stayed back. We're now almost halfway through Phase C, and the American must have all of his units deployed by now, but I've hardly seen any of them, and I'm beginning to think he might have left it too late to make his attack. The remnants of the infantry that survived my off-map barrage were spotted moving in the tree line but went to ground. They're presumably the spotters for the arty that hit my Flak 41, and there's an M7 by the village on the left that also begins counter battery fire on my 18mm mortars position, pinning it down. On the left, engineer reappeared, pushing forward, and another Pak-40 revealed its position by firing on him. An armoured vehicle, probably the Hellcat, sits further back by the tree line and waits. And in the centre there's more American units beginning moving forward now, but the majority still hold back while the artillery picks off my units, and the Flak 41 being one of them. So I brought in one of my HS-129s to hit the Hellcat on the right, and it was able to take it out. The second 129 came in and I sent it against the Abrams, and that managed to take it out as well. I brought in my ME-109 to provide cover again, but it's overwhelmed and destroyed by the American fighters. and my first HS-129 came back round and it was able to take out the M8 before getting safely off the map. My Flak 41 on the left of the hill and a nearby Jaeger squad came under artillery fire. It was fairly heavy, so I'm guessing it's from a 155mm M12 self-propelled artillery gun, and the Flak 41 was pinned down after just 2 rounds. So again, learning points here about keeping units with no fire orders or return fire only orders until I can make more effective use of them. So there's only 10 minutes left in the battle now, and it looks like the American might be finally beginning his proper advance. None of my units that were defending advanced positions had been in any way effective, and almost all of them have been destroyed. The American brings in the Marauder again, which strafed and pinned a Pak 38 out in the far left flank. I don't think that gun had fired on anything yet, so it must have been spotted by recce troops. On the right hand side, the armoured rifle squad and the leader section arrived in the trees in the ridge and began firing on my mortar. As I'd taken out the tanks and Hellcats that had moved forward on the right, I decided to reposition my Flak 41 on the hill to cover the approach from the centre, as it looked like the main push was going to come there. And as the Flak 41 gets into position, the Flak 36 and the ground below the hill guarding the road was engaged by what I'm guessing was a 105mm M4. The Flak 41 shot at the tank, which returned fire, pinning the AA gun straight away and damaging an adjacent Jaeger squad. The tank then focused again on the Flak 36, which also came under artillery fire and was pinned down. All I've been able to do to support the Flak 36 is drop fire from my GB H40s on the M4, and it finally succeeded in forcing it to fall back. But the Flak 36 was still under fire from the artillery even when the tank withdrew, and it was destroyed. Over in the left flank, my Flak 41 in the hill there is now under fire from 2 artillery pieces, and the Flak 36 near the crossroads to the right is wiped out also by indirect fire. So the American's making really good use of his self-propelled artillery units, and I'm sure there's some mortar carriers in there as well. And again, there's a Jaeger squad nearby that gets caught up in artillery fire. I did try to move it to safety, but it was fired on by a couple of vehicles sitting behind the trees and was pinned down. The few American infantry that had made it to the tree line on the left were finally wiped out, but there are other units advancing behind the trees to the left of the road. My infantry by the crossroads is under fire from a Hellcat and an M8 command car. With the loss of the anti-tank guns earlier, I decided to send a Jaeger squad down from the hill to hold a forward position, which was not the best move. They engaged an infantry squad moving along the road, and a Stug and an LG-42 also fired on them. So once again my anti-tank units revealed their position by firing on infantry. On the right now, a column of tanks appeared and began pushing down the main road, and as soon as they cleared the tree line they stopped to fire on my Panzerabwehr unit that was supposed to be ambushing an advance on the other road. I brought in one of my HS-129s to attack that column, but it was driven off by a massive machine gun fire, and then it was chased and destroyed by American fighters. So, lessons for use of aircraft as well here. I moved the Stug on the left down from the hill to target the Hellcat and the M8 command car, and it was able to damage the M8 and suppress both vehicles. And my Flak 41 on the hill is busy firing at an aircraft when an M4A3 fires on it and takes it out. In the centre I've got an LG-42 that's been under constant artillery fire, and it's finally destroyed by the advancing tanks. The Pak 40 that's in the trees on the ridge on the right hand side comes under artillery fire, and it's pinned just as it's about to engage the American tanks. Then the tanks are able to wipe it out with machine gun fire. I'd positioned a Stug at the far end of those trees and it engaged the lead tank, but its round bounced. I did get off a second shot, again without doing any damage, but it came under increasing fire from the American tanks and I decided to pull it back into cover. In the centre, an LG42 up in the tree line is about the only anti-tank gun that I've got left in that area, and it fired in the tanks, and it drew a hail of machine gun fire in itself, and it was pinned down and destroyed in seconds. My Jaeger in the trees by the road to the left spotted a half-track approaching, and they engaged it, but the half-track backed off and pinned them with machine gun fire. And the STRIX that I'd sent down to deal with the Hellcat earlier is now trying to deal with a smaller American Vance on the left, but it's up against two M4s and an M1 anti-tank gun, and it's also under fire from the tanks over on the right and it's destroyed. On the left I decided to reposition my Pak 40 and Flak 41 to support the centre a bit more, and as they're moving, a truck carrying engineers appeared and is engaged by my Jaegers and the LG42. An M15 moves to support the engineers by firing on my Jaeger, then it switches target to the Pak 40, which is moving in the open. The Jaeger and an LG42 fire on the engineers that are pinned in the open as well, but the M15 pins my Pak, then switches fire back to the Jaeger squad when the Pak goes to ground. The American then calls in artillery fire in my LG42's position, while the M15 alternates fire between the Jaeger squad and the Pak 40. And by now I've decided I need to redeploy the STRIX on the hill to help defend against the push that's coming on the right flank. There's about 5.5 minutes left. The American begins to push hard for the hilltop with a group of tanks that come in the road on the right. They're met by fire from the only two anti-tank units, I think, that held their fire until they came up against armour. One of the tanks was destroyed and another crew bails out, but they return fire on the STRIX, damaging its gun and forcing it to fall back. The Pak 38 up on the hilltop also takes machine gun fire from multiple vehicles, and I try to pull it back into a better cover, but it gets pinned down. And I have my GBHs firing on the tanks now to try and force them to fall back, and they do, but not before the STRIX was destroyed. I'd also tried rushing a couple of Jaeger squads into range of the tanks to use their anti-tank weapons while they were busy firing on the STRIX and the Pak, but I realised that they weren't going to make it in time and ordered them to fall back. But one of the squads was fired on by the tank's machine guns further back by the crossroads and was pinned down. I'd managed to save the Pak, but the second Jaeger squad in the trees took fire from a tank on the right hand side and that was also pinned down. So although we've driven off the tanks on the right, the tanks over on the left approach to the hill took out one of my GBHs, and my Pak 40 and Pak 38 was pinned when it was strafed by a P38. But my STRIX and the Flak 41 from the left flank are getting close to getting into position, but there's obviously a host of units now advancing towards the top of the hill. And another Jaeger squad destroyed by fire from the tanks. Over on the left, the Hellcat appeared from behind the trees and had a quick draw competition against the LG42, and fortunately the LG42 won, and I then sent that gun over towards the right to help out there. The Pak up in the hilltop recovered its morale and killed the tank that had been bailed out earlier. Not a huge amount of good, but better than nothing. The M15 over to the left kept up firing my Jaeger, and as my LG42 redeployed, it was strafed by a P38 and then fired on by the M8 that the STRIX had damaged earlier. My Jaegers that are hidden in the trees forward are a pretty obvious position, and the Americans being cautious with his tanks there, but eventually the Jaegers open up with machine guns and just draw fires on themselves and get wiped out. I'd brought in my HS-129 for another attack on the tanks, but again it was driven off by machine gun fire, so it's pretty ineffective on its own. And my Flak 41 up on the top of the hill was eventually destroyed by artillery fire as well. My STIG on the right hand side had been forced to fall back, and when it returned to the fight it was able to pick off a tank that was working its way around the right flank. But as the STIG repositioned up on top of the hill, it was spotted and knocked out by the tanks making the main advance. Over on the left flank, my Jaegers out there are now under fire from the M8 and M15, and my LG42 is still being fired on by the Bantam. The LG42 eventually goes down, followed a few seconds later by the Jaeger squad. So things are beginning to crumble now all over the place. In the centre, the tanks are pushing onto the hilltop from the right hand side again, and the Pak-38 prepares to fire on them. It gets up one shot off, but it missed, and it was then pinned down by the tanks, destroyed. I repositioned the STIG to try and give it some chance of getting sight of one tank at a time from behind the trees, but it's obvious that I'm not going to be able to hold them off for another 2.5 minutes. So after 20 plus minutes of not much activity, then about 15 minutes of methodical destruction, it came down to a last 5 minutes of hard pushing against my hilltop defenders. A tank appeared to the left of the tree line and fired on my STIG. It missed, but the STIG doesn't. But to the left of the STIG, P-38 strafes my remaining Kaby H, which is firing on the advancing tanks. And there are 3 tanks in the lead group, and as soon as they have line of sight on the Kaby H, they suppress it with machine gun fire. And the Lightning circles round and comes in for another strafing run, just making sure that the gun stays pinned down. And then the tanks open up again and finish off the gunners when they stick their heads up. On the right hand flank, my anti-tank guns there had done nothing at all and weren't in any position to influence the outcome of the battle, but the Americans spotted them and called in a marauder that strafed them, and then they were killed by artillery fire. And I think the American was probably concerned that there might still be unseen units on the left side of the hill that could prevent a victory, but whatever the reason, they started advancing with a few light armoured vehicles on the left. I took out an WC-52 with my LG-42 and then sent the LG-42 and the Pak-38 forward to try to get a last couple of kills. Up on top of the hill, the tanks are pushing up behind the tree line to take care of the STIG, but they hadn't counted on my glorious Führer section that destroyed an M4 with its anti-tank grenade, but they didn't even get time to cheer before they were wiped out. And that gave the Americans control of the hilltop with a minute and a half to spare when the STIG was taken out by that other tank. And then M15 appeared and killed my off-map artillery observer, and that was the top of the hilltop bare of German defenders. On the left hand flank, the Pak-38 there came under artillery fire, and there were also still 2 P-38 Lightnings in the area, so they just had fun strafing my anti-tank gun. And it was also under artillery fire, and it was also being fired on by the M8 command car there, and I think it's M8 that finally takes out the gun. So that's it, and neutral view shows that the Americans still had plenty of units left. He's got, I think, about 6 or 7 tanks on the hilltop, as well as some half-tracks and some infantry. There's the anti-tank gun there as well. You can see his artillery, self-propelled artillery all around the hill. It's all out of ammo apart from the mortar on the right hand side, so I'm sure they were replenished numerous times during the battle. So American won. It says here that I got a major victory, but in reality it was a total defeat. So I really enjoyed the attack defence scenario. I suppose I was a bit surprised coming up against somebody who seemed to have been playing these scenarios for months on end. A really fantastic approach, keeping everything until he had enough forces to move forward and just brush aside my lighter units and then concentrate his armour after the artillery had done the hard work. And in terms of my use of air power, as I said, learning points there. I need to keep it back over my own anti-aircraft and stop sending it over his anti-aircraft fire. But the main learning point for me was have everything on no fire orders until it's got valid targets in sight. Don't waste anti-tank units firing at infantry. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please leave me a comment and rate the video, and I hope to see you again next time. Cheers.